It started with a letter that was so absurd, I actually laughed when I read it. The HOA claimed my driveway was non-compliant with their guidelines, and therefore, I had 30 days to remove it. Not change it. Not repair it. Remove it. Who even says that? A driveway isn't a lawn ornament you can just toss into a dumpster. It's cement, rebar, gravel, sweat, and hours of labor. I thought it had to be some kind of mistake, so I went to the HOA office with a letter in hand, ready to clear things up. But no, sitting behind their desk with their smug smiles, they told me I was in violation because the driveway was too long and did not fit the community aesthetic. I walked out that day with one thought running through my head. If they want my driveway gone, fine. But they're not going to like what replaces it. Most people, after being told something like that, would either comply or lawyer up. I decided to go with option 3, outsmart them. If I had to destroy my driveway, then I was going to build something that turned their rule book upside down. That night, I stood outside under the porch light, staring at my driveway with a grin on my face. What if, instead of a plain slab of concrete, I turned it into something no one else had, something that wasn't technically a driveway at all? That's when the idea hit me. A miniature racetrack. Not for real cars, of course. That would have been impossible. But for remote control cars, go-karts, scooters, bikes, anything that had wheels and could bring joy. The HOA wanted me to erase convenience. I was going to replace it with chaos and laughter. The demolition was the easy part. With a rented jackhammer and some friends who owed me favors, we tore up the driveway piece by piece until it was nothing but rubble. My neighbors thought I'd lost my mind, and honestly, maybe I had. But then came the fun part, construction. I laid out a winding oval with sharp turns, bank corners, and even a small ramp that shot toy cars into the air. I painted lanes, put up tiny plastic guardrails, and even installed miniature traffic lights that I rigged with an old Arduino. By the time it was finished, the driveway had transformed into something straight out of a kid's dream. Every child on the block flocked to my house that weekend, RC cars buzzing, bikes zipping, and scooters skidding around corners. My house went from being the one under violation to being the most popular spot in the neighborhood. It didn't take long before the HOA caught wind of my little project. They showed up in their pressed polo shirts and clipboards, staring at the track as if I had built a nuclear reactor in my front yard. "This is not a driveway," one of them said. "Exactly," I replied with a grin. "You told me to remove my driveway, and I did. This is not a driveway. It's a recreational installation." They sputtered, shuffled papers, and threatened me with more fines. But I pointed to the rulebook. Nowhere did it say I couldn't use my property for small-scale recreation. Nowhere did it say I couldn't build something that wasn't a driveway. I had them cornered. They left that day fuming, muttering about how they would review the bylaws. Meanwhile, kids continued racing. Parents brought lawn chairs to watch, and my so-called violation became a neighborhood attraction. Pretty soon, it wasn't just kids who were coming to use the track. Adults started bringing their RC cars too. My neighbor Carl, who hadn't spoken to anyone in years, suddenly emerged from his garage with a dusty box containing a remote-controlled monster truck. Another neighbor built a custom dragster that looked like it belonged on a Fast and Furious set. Saturdays turned into unofficial race days, with families gathering on my lawn, snacks being passed around, and cheers erupting every time a car flipped over a ramp. What had started as petty revenge against the HOA was becoming a community event, one that brought people together in a way that block parties and HOA meetings never had. My house wasn't just where people lived nearby. It was where they lived together. The HOA, of course, couldn't stand seeing me win. They called emergency meetings, sent out newsletters condemning dangerous activities, and even tried to shut me down by claiming the track was a safety hazard. But every time they tried to act, I was ready. I got the city involved, had inspectors look at it. And guess what? Everything was up to code. They couldn't prove it was dangerous. They couldn't prove it was illegal. And they couldn't deny that the entire neighborhood, except them, loved it. The more they fought me, the more foolish they looked. Eventually, they threatened to sue. But by then, they had lost all credibility. Nobody took them seriously anymore. They weren't the authority. They were the punchline. By the time a year had passed, the HOA had quietly rewritten their bylaws to prevent unconventional yard modifications. But by then, it didn't matter. The track had become legendary. Even if they forced me to eventually remove it, the memory was carved into the neighborhood forever. People still tell the story. How the HOA demanded I remove my driveway, and instead, I built a racetrack that made our community more alive than it had ever been. And here's the truth. They thought they were taking something away from me. But in reality, they gave me the greatest gift of all, an excuse to build joy out of rebellion. Because sometimes, when someone tries to strip away your freedom, the best response isn't anger or submission. It's creativity. It's laughter. It's racing cars down a track that never should have existed in the first place. What really cemented the legend of the track weren't the Saturday afternoon races or the kids' tournaments. It was the midnight races. It started small, just a few teenagers sneaking out with flashlights and souped-up RC cars, racing under the cover of darkness when the HOA members were asleep. But word spread quickly. Before long, the races became a tradition. Every Friday night, as the clock struck midnight, neighbors of all ages would gather quietly, bringing headlights, lanterns, and even small speakers. The hum of engines filled the night air, laughter echoed down the block, and for those few hours, our street wasn't just another cookie-cutter suburb. It was alive, rebellious, and free. The HOA hated it, of course. They tried patrolling, even sitting in their cars like watchdogs. But the community had grown clever. We set up decoy races, fake schedules, and even used walkie-talkies to stay one step ahead. It wasn't just fun anymore, it was strategy. It was us against them, and every time an RC car zoomed past their empty patrols, we felt like we had won a tiny battle in a much larger war. The track did something that nothing else in the neighborhood ever could. It united people. Families that had lived next door to each other for years, without saying more than a polite hello, now found themselves cheering side by side, sharing snacks, trading car parts, and planning new race events. Kids learned teamwork. Parents laughed with people they'd once considered strangers. Even older folks, the ones who had no interest in racing, came out with lawn chairs just to watch and soak in the energy. The track turned into a heartbeat, pumping life into a community that had been slowly suffocating under rules, fines, and silence. And the more united we became, the weaker the HOA looked. Their authority wasn't slipping because of lawsuits or politics. It was slipping because people had remembered how to live without asking for permission. By this point, the HOA was desperate. They had rewritten bylaws, hired lawyers, even threatened to call the police. But nothing stuck. Every angle they tried, we had a counter. The police laughed at their complaints. The lawyers gave up when they realized the track didn't technically break any rules. And their newsletters, once dreaded notices of fines and penalties, became nothing more than punchlines that we read aloud at race nights, laughing at their attempts to control us. I'll never forget one meeting where the HOA president slammed his fist on the table and shouted, "This neighborhood is out of control." He didn't realize the irony. For once, we were out of their control, and that was exactly why we were happier than ever. The harder they tried to crush us, the more we rallied together, until their authority was nothing more than an illusion they clung to in empty conference rooms. It all built up to what we now call the Great Neighborhood Championship. We organized it in secret, passing out invitations under the radar. On the day of the race, the turnout was unbelievable. Families from other neighborhoods came. People brought food, trophies, and even custom-designed race cars that looked like miniature works of art. We had heats, semifinals, and a grand finale. Kids wore matching shirts, parents waved banners, and neighbors who had once barely acknowledged each other now roared with excitement. Side by side, the HOA tried to stop it, of course. They showed up with clipboards and threats. But when they saw the sheer number of people there, they froze. How could they stop something that had grown so much bigger than rules? In that moment, they weren't the rulers of the neighborhood anymore. They were outsiders, powerless against the joy that had taken root. When the championship ended with fireworks and cheers that echoed into the night, everyone knew it. This was no longer just a track. It was history. Even years later, after the track was eventually dismantled and the land repaved, the memory never faded. People still tell the story to newcomers. How one ridiculous demand from the HOA backfired spectacularly, sparking a rebellion that changed the neighborhood forever. The track lives on not in asphalt or painted lanes, but in the friendships it created, in the laughter it sparked, and in the reminder that joy is always stronger than control. And here's the eternal truth. When someone tries to silence life, life only finds a louder way to speak. They thought they had erased a driveway, but what they really did was lay the foundation for something greater, a story, a legend, and a community that learned that sometimes the best way to fight is to have fun. And every time I hear the hum of a toy car or the cheers of a small race, I smile, because I know the legacy of that track will never truly fade. The story of the track didn't stay confined to our little block. Over time, it spread like wildfire. Friends told friends, family members told coworkers, and soon it wasn't just a neighborhood tale. It became a citywide legend. Local newspapers wrote articles about the driveway rebellion, and a small TV station even came by to do a segment, filming kids racing their RC cars while parents talked about how the track had transformed the community. For once, our neighborhood wasn't known for its strict HOA or cookie-cutter houses. It was known for defiance, laughter, and ingenuity. And the best part? Other neighborhoods started doing it too. I'd hear stories of people tearing up sections of their yards and building tracks, obstacle courses, or communal gardens, all in the spirit of reclaiming space from restrictive rules. What started as my personal rebellion had ignited something bigger, a movement of people remembering that communities are for the people who live in them, not the ones who govern them with clipboards. As the years passed, the track became more than just a memory. It became a story handed down. New families moved in. Kids grew up. People moved away. But the legend remained. I'd sit on my porch sometimes and hear parents telling their children, "Did you know this used to be a racetrack?" Their eyes would widen with wonder as they tried to picture it. Tiny cars zipping down lanes where now stood plain concrete. Sometimes the kids would grab their bikes and pretend, tracing the invisible curves with their wheels, shouting out imaginary announcer voices as if they were part of a race that no longer existed. That's when I realized something important. The track didn't need to physically exist anymore. It had become a myth, a legacy, something alive in imagination and memory. And myths, unlike asphalt, don't crumble. They only grow stronger with every retelling. One summer evening, years after the track was gone, I was sitting outside when a group of young adults pulled up in cars I didn't recognize. They walked up my driveway and introduced themselves. To my surprise, they were kids who had grown up racing on the track. Now they were in college, some with jobs, some with stories of their own. But they had all returned to the neighborhood for one reason: to say thank you. They told me that those races had been some of the best moments of their childhoods, times when they felt free, joyful, and connected. One of them laughed and said he even wrote his college essay about the track, calling it the place where community beat control. Standing there, listening to them, I realized that the HOA had lost in a way far greater than they could ever understand. They had tried to erase a driveway, but instead, they had created memories strong enough to bring people back years later, memories that outlasted even the people who made the rules. Now, when I look at the repaved driveway, it doesn't bother me. The concrete is smooth, plain, and ordinary, but I don't see it that way. To me, it's a canvas layered with invisible paint. Every curve of the old track, every tire mark from an RC car, every laugh and cheer is still there, if you look closely enough. Sometimes, when the sun sets just right, I swear I can almost see the faint outlines of the lanes glowing across the concrete, as if the track itself refuses to be forgotten. And maybe that's the truth of it. The HOA thought they could control us with rules and fines, but what they didn't understand was that rebellion isn't about breaking rules. It's about refusing to let life be boxed in. The track taught us that joy is its own kind of resistance, and laughter is stronger than fear. That's the lesson I carry, and that's the legacy we left behind. Even though the physical track no longer exists, in a way, it never really died. Every time I hear the hum of an engine, even if it's just a lawnmower down the street, it sparks a memory. Every time I see a kid chalking patterns on the sidewalk, I think of the painted lanes we once had. The track lingers not in the ground, but in the way people live here now. Neighbors still gather more often. Children still laugh a little louder. Families still sit on porches longer into the evening. The HOA thought they could erase a slab of pavement, but what they really did was create a ripple effect that carried through the entire neighborhood. And the more they tried to bury it under silence, the more it echoed in the hearts of everyone who was there. That's what they'll never understand. You can bulldoze concrete, but you can't bulldoze joy. The track was never just about cars or ramps or painted lanes. It was about what happens when ordinary people refuse to bow down to fear. We didn't set out to start a movement. We didn't plan to unite a neighborhood. We just wanted to live freely, laugh loudly, and turn an unfair demand into something unforgettable. But sometimes the smallest acts of rebellion grow into the biggest reminders of what it means to be human. The HOA operated on the belief that authority was everything. But we learned something greater. That community, when it stands together, is untouchable. Rules crumble. Bylaws fade. Meetings end. But stories live forever. And ours was proof that even in the quietest suburban street, freedom has a way of finding its voice. So here's the truth I'll carry for the rest of my life. The track was never truly destroyed. Asphalt can be torn up, paint can be washed away, and ramps can be dismantled, but the spirit of what we built together never left. It lingers in memory, in laughter, in the invisible tire marks that only those who were there can still see. Sometimes I close my eyes and I can hear it. The whir of engines, the cheers of neighbors, the sound of joy defying control. And in those moments, I realized that the track wasn't just a patch of ground. It was proof that people will always find a way to carve freedom out of stone, even in the unlikeliest of places. Years from now, when the houses belong to new families, and when my name is long forgotten, the story will still survive. Some child, curious and wide-eyed, will tug on their parent's sleeve and ask, "Did you know this driveway used to be a racetrack?" And in that small question, the track will live again, not in concrete, but in imagination, which is stronger than any wall, any bylaw, any fine. In that instant, the laughter of the past will echo into the present, and the rebellion we sparked will breathe again. Because legends don't need foundations of stone. They need only a story and a voice willing to tell it. That is the immortality of rebellion. The HOA thought they had erased a driveway, but instead, they built something eternal. They built a legend without realizing it. a reminder that control always crumbles, but freedom never fades. And so long after their names are forgotten, long after their papers have yellowed and their signatures have dissolved into dust, the tale of the driveway that became a racetrack will still be racing forward, untouchable, unstoppable, and forever free. That's the ending, but also the beginning, because every time the story is told, the track starts again. And in that way, it will never truly end,